Welcome back to One Brain Ops chess content. So, today I want to talk about an experience that I think pretty much any tournament chess player who's played enough games will have had, which is being very proud of a game that you won and then either going over it with a coach or, in my case here, plugging it into an engine and realizing that it wasn't really as good as you thought it was. So, we're going to look at a game today that I was absolutely very proud of walking away from it. And, well, you've seen the title of the video. So, let's get into it. So, I had black in this game. E4, C5. And I will say this was played not long after I had first started playing the Sicilian with black, so I really was not super familiar with all these positions just yet. Knight f3, e6, d4, c takes, knight takes, a6. So this is the Khan Sicilian, and I'm not going to dive too deep into the theory of it, of course, but the idea is just, yes, we're delaying development of the pieces, but the point is just to control this b5 square. In a lot of Sicilians, and especially nowadays, the Sicilians with bishop b5 have gotten very popular. So just preventing that is kind of the idea of the Khan. It's also the idea in the Najdorf, which is another variation you may be familiar with. The primary difference between the Khan and Najdorf being that d6 will be played rather than e6. And, of course, lots of other differences as well. But that's the structural one. And in other cases, too, either this knight can end up coming to b5, or the other knight can go to c3 and then b5 in some lines. So a6 early on just shuts all of that down. So knight c3, continuing on. Bishop b4. Nowadays, I know that you should play queen c7 here in the Khan. It's a little bit less obvious of a move. If you play bishop b4 first, it makes it very clear that the goal is just to take this knight and double the pawns. So anyway, queen c7 is a little more precise, but bishop b4 is not a bad move. Bishop d2, knight c6, knight takes c6, b takes c6. So generally, I'm pretty happy to see this trade. The reason being that I'm glad to get my pawn toward the center and help to support a d5 break. So usually you're okay with that as black in this sort of setup. So continuing on, we get a3, so chasing the bishop back. Bishop a5. Interestingly, the computer actually wants to retreat all the way back to f8, which is a little bit strange. I do understand the reason, though, which is that the engine also liked in the previous position, instead of a3, it really liked queen g4. So going after this weakened pawn on g7. And after bishop a5, so a3 and bishop a5, the engine still really likes queen g4 and targeting this weakness. So that's why it wanted the bishop to go back to f8. My opponent, though, didn't play queen g4, which is kind of a difficult move to spot if you're not familiar with those ideas, and just developing the bishop is very natural. So bishop d3, I continue with d5, so using these pawns to my advantage to support d5 here, and white went ahead and captured, and the engine wants to just castle. I don't think the engine likes the structure that results from this, because after e takes d5 and c takes d5, this pawn started the game on b7 and made its way all the way into the center with 2 captures. And now, looking at this position, black actually has 2 pawns in the center against none. So black can actually develop quite a space advantage, and already in this position, I was actually feeling pretty good about it as black, which, doesn't always happen out of the opening, because black always starts with a slight disadvantage. For the engine's part, the engine says it's actually plus 0.5, so white still basically has the opening advantage according to the engine, but I was pretty happy here. So continuing on, white now castles. Knight f6, just developing. Rook e1, so a little bit annoying pinning the e6 pawn to the king, but I was just going to castle anyway, so we just castle here. Okay, and now we get b4, so chasing the bishop back, and bishop c7. Oop, didn't mean to show the next move, but we'll get to that in a second. It is a rather nice place for the bishop to wind up, just pointing at the king side, putting some constant pressure there. So again, I'm pretty happy with how this opening is turning out for me. We now get bishop g5. An annoying pin, certainly, but it's fairly easy to break it, and I went ahead and played queen d6 right away, which actually is how the engine recommends to get out of that pin as well. Reason this works is that you're threatening to take on h2 with the bishop behind it, so white has to answer that threat first. My opponent went ahead and played g3, and now the engine just wants to move the knight. I had other ideas in mind, and this is the first spot where the engine made me sad in this game. Because I had what I thought was a really great move here, which is e5. I'm taking full advantage of my 2 pawns in the center. I'm controlling all of this space. These pawns are just going to start advancing up the board. It's wonderful, and it's a complete blunder. So go ahead and pause the video and find it here for white. So it's white to move and find the the move that proves why e5 was a mistake. So I hope you found it there. If you didn't, we're going to look at it now. So the correct move here for white is actually what my opponent played. She did capture the knight on f6. And of course, I don't want to capture back with the queen because this pawn just hangs. So I took back with the pawn. The problem is my opponent missed the follow-up move here, which is she can play safely knight takes d5. And the reason that works, I can't take back with the queen. If I take with the queen, bishop takes h7 check, my queen is lost. So in fact, I actually just lose a pawn here, and the engine actually thinks this is about +3. So even though black's only down a pawn here, white's advantage is significantly more than just a pawn. White is in a very good position. So luckily for me in the game, my opponent did miss that and instead played, after trading on f6, bishop e2. So she didn't see that she could just take this pawn immediately. She decided instead to add the queen to it to try to threaten it, and that does give me time to now defend the pawn. So bishop b7 defends the pawn. And now my position is actually kind of nice after all this. The engine says I'm minus 0.7, so I do have a slight advantage here. And you can kind of understand why. Because my opponent didn't take advantage of my blunder, I do have this big pawn center. And if you look at just kind of where my pieces are, once these pawns start advancing, my bishops are pointed right at white's king. And I'm going to be poised for a big kingside attack. So we're going to go through the next sequence of moves here. So we get bishop f3, so attempting to go after this pawn again, but now that's easily diffused with just e4, a move that I wanted to play anyway because I want these pawns to be advancing forward. The bishop retreats to g2. We now get f5, so wanting to go all the way to f4 and try to break open the king. Queen h5, so attacking the f-pawn. And queen f6 defending it. Now we get knight to e2, so rotating the knight around, it's probably going to come into the f4 square. King h8, so the idea here is just to get out of the way of the rook, So I want to take advantage of this half-open file that I have here. So when the g-pawn captured on f6, it did create a line of attack for me. So that's always sort of the other side of the coin when you have doubled pawns. Yeah, the doubled pawns could end up being a long-term weakness, but you also get a half-open file. So if you can take advantage of that with your rooks and your queen, you might actually be able to create something. So we're getting ready to do that with king h8. So now we get bishop h3. So again, going after this pawn here. But that's okay, the pawn's just going to advance up to f4. And after knight takes, we get bishop takes, pawn takes, and rook g8 check. So inserting that move. And then after the king moves, now, okay, king h1 was a mistake. King f1 is a much better move here because ultimately the king is just going to get stuck here in the corner. And the key reason that it's so bad going to h1 is actually this bishop on the long diagonal. Once these pawns clear out, white is in a lot of trouble. So king h1 was a mistake. It goes from, yeah, just consulting the engine. King f1, the engine says, is -2. So bad, but maybe survivable. King h1 is actually -5, so significantly worse, going to h1 instead. But that said, black still has to play this correctly. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you how the rest of this game actually played out from this point first. I'm going to just go through the rest of the game, and then we're going to go back and see why the engine made me so sad when I reviewed the game after the fact. So I played the most natural move here. Queen takes f4. Black plays queen f5, so trying to trade the queens and hopefully survive the attack here. And, of course, I'm attacking. I don't want to trade queens, so queen h4. So I'm hitting the bishop, hitting the pawn. Both are only defended by the queen, so the queen is kind of tied down right now. And that made h4 seem like an appealing square to me. So white plays rook g1. This was her whole idea of going to the corner. Rather than going to f1, she's going to try to contest the g file, which makes sense. So then we get e3. So finally these pawns are going to make their way forward, and we're going to unleash this bishop. The bishop has never really been fully out of the game. It's always been supporting the center, but if we can clear this diagonal, it might just end up resulting in checkmate. So we get e3, f takes e3, d4 check, bishop g2, and then the next two moves are the ones that I was extremely proud of. So the most powerful piece in this position is the bishop on b7. So yes, you could capture with the bishop on g2, but I instead played rook takes g2, which is the best move on the board. And after rook takes, again, you could capture with the bishop, but the best move is rook to g8. So taking advantage of the pin and just adding another attacker. And now white plays the other rook to g1, so trying to defend. And again, I capture on g2 with the rook instead of the bishop because the bishop is just the more valuable piece. And now, if white captures back with the rook, it'll be mate. So white played queen e5 check, and I don't think she saw that rook takes g7 is possible here. It looks like it should be mate, but you're in check. So discovered check from the bishop. Only way out of check here, you can play e4 to prolong it a little bit, but if you play e4, the bishop will just take it. So ultimately you'll be forced to block with the rook, and then queen e1 is mate. If you want to give up your queen and survive a couple extra moves there as white, you can. But this is how the game ended. So I walked away from that thinking that was one of the best attacks I've ever played. And we're going to go back to this point here. So in this position here, instead of taking the pawn, which is what I played, after rook g8 and king h1, instead of taking the pawn, which is what I played, the engine says it's -5 if you just start pushing these pawns immediately and unleash the bishop. So it just wants to play d4 right now. And looking at it after the fact, in the moment, it's kind of hard to see these things sometimes in a tournament game, but when the engine just tells you something like this, you go, oh yeah, that's completely unstoppable. And that's the reaction that I had, 100%. I saw that move and I was like, oh, why didn't I think to play that earlier? I thought I had to wait. Nope, should play d4 now. Okay, but that's not horrible. I'm still -3 after taking the pawn. That can't be that bad, right? So my opponent now plays queen f5, and I go, okay, well, I'm attacking. I don't want to trade queens, so I'm going to play queen h4. Well, after playing queen h4, it now says it's -0.6. So I barely have any advantage left at all if white now plays this correctly, which is crazy to me. But even crazier, going back, the correct move is to trade queens, and I'm going to show this as a sideline. So the best move is actually to go ahead and capture this. After bishop takes, we're actually about -5.5 here. The engine actually wants to play this move rook g5 and just harass the bishop first, but the idea is exactly the same as the last idea. Just advance these pawns and they're unstoppable. So just to show an example of this, and I'm not even going to play necessarily the top moves, just what I think are most natural here. Bishop h3, so getting out of danger. Then it just wants to play e4. And then bishop g2, so just trying to get in the way of this coming attack. But it's just not enough, because rook a to g8 is coming. And then say something like rook to g1 here. So again, trying to just defend against this coming attack. It doesn't matter, because you have a similar idea to what I played in the game. Just capture it, and after rook takes, just e3, and you're just crashing through. And it's crazy that all of this works. It's crazier that all of this is so natural after the queen trade. Like, I feel like I probably could have found most of these moves if it had come down to this. And like here, the problem is this passed pawn. So like white could conceivably either take this now and then you take back, or just bring the other rook to g1, and it just doesn't matter. You're just going to get your exchange back that you just sacrificed. So in fact, the engine wants to lead with the rook again, so takes, and then the absolutely devastating e takes f2. So, like, the line that I saw immediately off the, top of my head was just, oh, well, I'm just going to take back with the bishop, king takes, and then I just push through and you can't stop the promotion. E takes f2 is even more devastating. It's just forced mate because you're still taking advantage of this crazy pin. So that's the second reason that the engine made me sad. Third, if you count the blunder that my opponent and I both missed earlier on. So I guess we'll count that. We're up to 3 reasons the engine made me sad here. But going back to the actual game, I did play queen h4 instead. And again, I still have a very slight advantage here. But let's just see what happened next. So rook g1, so contesting that g file. And I go ahead and play e3. And at the time, I thought, this is brilliant, because I'm forcing open this diagonal, I'm going to take advantage of the king, and that's what actually happened in the game, or take advantage of the bishop being on this diagonal with the king and the king being exposed. And it's going to be great. And that's exactly what happens after f takes e3. The game just ends. It goes to immediately -6. Well, okay, now it's thinking -6.5 even. Okay, so it just says black is clearly better. And that's how the game finished. But black has a draw, right? Or excuse me, white has a draw if white plays the correct sequence here. So the fourth reason the engine made me sad is in this position, queen takes f7. And again, once you see it, the idea is super obvious. Yeah, you're going to release this bishop, but if I'm just attacking the bishop, I can just capture it. So it just doesn't work anymore. You can't play d4. So instead, the engine says the best move here is to take on f2. So threatening the rook, of course. And now white will just trade rooks on g8. So rook takes, and then just the calm bishop g2. So rather than, sorry, I meant to draw an arrow there. Rather than taking the bishop and allowing black to take on h3 when there are mate threats that are impossible to stop. Oh, the engine made me sad again here in the analysis. No, in fact, it's not that there's an unstoppable mate threat after queen takes h3. It's that if you take b7, queen e4 is just mate in 2. Because the only move is to block with the bishop and you just capture it for mate. So yes, that one doesn't count as an official engine made me sad, though. We're still at 4. But after bishop g2, there's just no way to continue the attack. You have to play something like bishop a8, so getting out of the way of the queen, and granted, if white slips up, it's still very possible that you'll get a mate out of this, but in fact, this is just completely even now. White can just hold this now because of all of these threats of perpetual check. If the queen, for example, ever leaves defense of the f6 square, it'll be an easy perpetual for white. And another example of that, so one move white can just play here is rook f1, and it looks like for a moment rook takes g2 might actually create something here, because after the king takes back, then suddenly d4 check and white's in trouble again, and that is absolutely true. But white doesn't have to do that. Instead, white can just play the very simple queen e8. And so here, of course, if you go rook g8, which is what the engine wants to do, it'll lead to a perpetual. And if you try to run away by playing king g7, now it says white is plus 0.5 or plus 5 after capturing the rook. So white is just up the equivalent of a rook according to the engine here. And again, it seems like white should have some sort of crazy attack, but this d4 discovery just doesn't work because the bishop can be captured. So it's insane that white not only survives all of this, but actually ends up winning if black is too aggressive. So that was number 4 of how the engine made me sad. But let's continue with the game, because my opponent did play f takes e3 and allow d4 check, and after bishop g2, I got to play rook takes g2, rook takes, rook g8, and those, by the way, rook takes g2 and rook g8 were the top engine moves. And after rook g1, my idea of taking with the rook again is in fact forced mate. However, it is not the best move because there's a faster mate that I overlooked, because in my whole idea of this bishop is the strongest piece, I don't want to give it up. I just missed that there's a easy mate here after bishop takes g2, and after rook takes, just queen e1. And so the queen will block, the rook will block, and it will be mate. So, yeah, after all that, the engine managed to make me sad for a fifth time by pointing out that bishop takes g2 was 4 moves faster than what I actually played. Because, well, white didn't play the survive for the longest line by playing queen e5 check. She could have instead played queen c8, giving up the queen there, and then capturing the rook, and that survives a few extra moves. But ultimately, bishop takes was very easy to see, and I just missed it because I had a bit of tunnel vision there. I was stuck on one idea. So, in the end, am I still proud of this game? Well, yes. I think I'm still proud of finding these two moves here. Rook takes g2 and rook g8, and finding that winning idea in that position. All the other stuff around it, the chances that my opponent had to draw or win the game with correct play, well, that's just the story of being a chess player sometimes. Sometimes you'll play a great game, and other times you'll think you've played a great game until the engine tells you otherwise. Thank you for watching One Brain Ops, and I'll see you in the next one.